Fair warning, I'm actually quite new to the SIOP model. This is the first book I've read on it. So I'm still learning, I'm still on that voyage of discovery, and consequently, this is not going to be an authoritative review. I'm just going to talk maybe about some things that struck me. If you're looking for an expert to talk about this, you'd have to look elsewhere. So that being said, my own teaching experience is I spent several years teaching English abroad. And in my experience, most international schools abroad, or at least in Asia, tend to follow the British model, the CELTA, the Delta, etc. And they have a whole bunch of acronyms of different lesson formats. So like the PPP, the Present, Practice, Produced, or TTT, Test, Teach, Test, or the TBL, Task-Based Learning, or TAVI, Text as a Vehicle for Language Instruction, etc. And I took a number of courses, got a number of certificates, again, the CELTA, the Delta, any number of other Cambridge courses like the Certificate in Advanced Methodology, Train the Trainer, etc. So I became very familiar with all of that teaching practice and those type of acronyms. But I've now moved back to the United States and have been got my license for teaching ESL in the public schools, and am discovering that there's a whole new set of acronyms and different teaching practices. And at my new employer, the teaching model that's being used is the SIOP model. So I'm having to learn about that. So like I said, I'm learning about this for the first time. The first time I encountered the terminology was when I was practicing for the teacher certification test out of this handbook, which I reviewed on this channel. I'll leave a link to this in the description down below. But yeah, they have a description here of Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol, which I believe is pronounced SIOP. And, this is as good an introduction as any to the subject, so why don't we just go through this. The Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol was originally developed in the early 1990s as a 30-minute survey to evaluate the effectiveness of teachers' planning and implementation and assessment of sheltered English instruction. So it sounds like it started off as like a checklist for observers of lessons. The survey has been demonstrated to be valid and reliable and is still widely used to evaluate sheltered instruction programs, even those that do not follow SIOP as an instructional model. So it sounds like this isn't entirely clear here, but from information I got from this book and I guess from Wikipedia, I get the impression that it started as a checklist of things to look for in the lesson, and then that checklist was made available for teachers as a planning aid. The originators followed up on the success of SIOP as a survey tool by elaborating a full-scale approach to lesson planning and delivery, intended to give content instructors a systematic approach to teaching English language learners. SIOP divides the instructional process into 8 components: lesson preparation, building background, comprehensible input, strategies, interaction, practice and application, lesson delivery, and review and assessment. And yes, those are in this book here. So flipping over to the table of contents. Lesson preparation, building background, comprehensible input, strategies, interaction, practice application, and lesson delivery. And then within each of these, we see a number of different features, which are, I guess, the checklist that is used when evaluating these lessons. Feature 1, Feature 2, Feature 3, etc. But I'm getting ahead of myself, talking about my introduction to SIOP. I was asked when interviewing for the position of English language instructor or interventionist about my experience or knowledge of SIOP. And I made the mistake in the interview of saying that, I didn't really know much about it at all, which was my bad. I should have prepared better for the interview. But I did remember what the acronym stood for. And I had remembered vaguely studying for it when I was studying for the certification test. And I thought that sheltered instruction meant that the English language learners were put in a separate program than the rest of the class. They were kind of sheltered, but put in a different room, given different instruction. And apparently that's not what it means at all. This was one of the things I messed up on during the interview. Although it confuses me a little bit. Why is it called sheltered instruction then? This is something I feel like I'm still not clear on, even after reading this book. But anyways, after messing up that question very badly in the interview, and then being told I was hired on the condition of doing a course in SIOP, I decided to get a head start on this by getting some reading materials on SIOP. And I got this book off of Amazon. Now, if you put SIOP into Amazon, there are a number of books that pop up. Many of them seem to be in this Pearson series, and many of them, I think, are by these same authors. And the difference between all of them is not clear to me. But I bought this one largely because it looked to be the cheapest. And, when you're buying books on Amazon, when you don't even know what the book looks like or how useful it's going to be, or you haven't had a chance to flip through it at all, sometimes, deciding how much money you want to invest in it is the deciding factor. And it also looked like it was going to be a good introduction. But by all means, anyone out there in watching this video who knows more than I do and who has a book to recommend to me, please let me know in the comments, because I'd be interested in knowing if there are other good introductions to this model. The SIOP model, I guess, is a registered copyright, which creates, in my opinion, some stylistic... Well, what's the word I want to use? I don't know. I just think it looks a little bit distracting. So every time the authors use SIOP, they always have to put that little circle R there. To be fair, it's probably the lawyers who are making them do it. But yeah. It's apparently scientifically based in the sense that they have done experiments on this, or studies or surveys, and the data seems to be that this does improve students' scores. Although my impression of the history of language teaching methods is that it's very hard to get accurate data on it, because it's very difficult to ensure that all the practitioners who are part of the experiment are following the method exactly. I believe this was one of the problems with the cross studies of the 1970s. But that little caveat aside, much is made in this book about how this is scientifically based, and it does seem to improve students' scores. The book comes with a DVD, which unfortunately I was not able to make use of because I don't have a DVD player. I've got two computers. One is 10 years old, and the DVD player on that has just stopped working. Just normal wear and tear. I can't get it to eject anymore. And my new computer doesn't even have a DVD player, or sorry, CD-ROM, whatever. Yeah, that I know that's just me personally, but that's pretty common these days, right? These CD-ROMs, DVDs are... A lot of people don't have drives on their new computer that can handle this, right? I wish that this had been available as an extra on the website, which I think a lot of publishers are doing nowadays, where you go to the website, maybe you have to enter a code to prove that you bought the book, but then you have access to the material. But yeah, I did not make use of the CD-ROM. Throughout the book, there are places to go on the CD-ROM to see examples of the material. So, take my review with a grain of salt. I didn't use the extra material on here. Perhaps if I had, I would have gotten more out of the book. Okay, so, yes, where to start with this book? Professional development books are generally a little bit dry and boring to read. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I frequently have trouble focusing my attention on them. That's not true for all of the books, and I've reviewed a lot of books for professional development, and when they are well written and engaging, I make a point of saying that in my review. And I can think of a handful of books off the top of my head which actually were written in an engaging style. I'll link to my playlist in the description down below. But yeah, this isn't one of them. Written in a dry format. Yeah, I mean, we can read together a little bit here. This is just at random, but all the content and language objectives should evolve from the lesson topic and be part of the instructional plan. After a teacher writes content and language objectives, posts them, and discusses them with the students at the start of the class, at some point in the lesson, explicit instruction must be provided on these objectives. Students would then have opportunities to practice with the objectives and be assessed on their progress towards meeting them at the close of the lesson. In other words, each objective is what we want the students to learn, and each needs explicit attention. An objective is not a byproduct of an activity, but the foundation of one. The whole book is written like that. The books, yes. So most chapters start off with the feature of SIOP, and then, sorry, not feature, what would this be? One of the 8 components of SIOP, in this case, lesson preparation, and then lists each feature with some more explanation of features, quite often example activities. Yeah, here are example activities here for SIOP feature number 4, which is supplementary materials used to a high degree. And then, these are more example activities, there is an example lesson in which we read through the lesson plans of 4 teachers. Sorry, not the lesson plans, the actual lesson delivery. So it's a classroom description. So as Ms. Chen began the first day's lesson on the gold rush, she referred students to the content objectives written on the board. 1, find and label the 3 main routes to the west on a map. 2, tell 1 or 2 facts about each of these 3 trails. After reading the content objectives aloud, Mrs. Chen then explained the language objectives, etc. And then we've got Mrs. Hargrove's lesson, and then Mr. Hinson's lesson. Now, after reading each lesson, you are supposed to rate the teachers on how well they followed the SIOP model, and there's score sheets for each teacher. Perhaps, if I would have done this, I could have engaged with the book better and maybe been better able to focus on it, but I didn't do this. And the main reason I didn't do that is because I was trying to get this book read on the go. So, I would bring it to me at work, and I would read it during my work breaks. or I would bring it with me to the park where my kids were playing, and if the kids were occupying themselves and staying out of trouble, I grabbed 10 minutes to read the book. And I guess I had been wanting a book that you could just read straight through, rather than a book where you had to kind of like get out your paper and pencil and do the exercises. So as a consequence of that, well, there was a couple problems with this. One is because I was reading it in drips and drabs over breaks as they came in my work or parenting, I would quite often get stopped in the middle of it. And then there's a discussion of the lessons at the end of it. But I was like, that was yesterday I read about Ms. Chin's lesson. I don't really remember it all that well. Or even if I did remember it all that well, I had a hard time keeping all 3 lessons in my head when I read through the objectives. So I found this part of the book, and it's a big part of each chapter, something that wasn't ideal for the way in which I was trying to process the book. Now, the other thing as well is, you're reading this book because you want to get useful information, right? But when you're reading the teaching scenarios, you know that at least 2 out of the 3 teaching scenarios are going to be less than ideal practice. They're going to be less than ideal lessons because there's only one ideal lesson. It actually took me a little bit to clue on to that each chapter has one ideal lesson. One lesson where, in this case, is Ms. Chin, though it's not always the first one. But one lesson in which somebody gets a perfect score, all 4s, which is the highest score. So I guess once you clue on to that, you can figure out which one is the perfect lesson and then just maybe concentrate on that lesson. I have to admit, even after finishing this book, I do find myself feeling like I don't fully have a firm grasp on what the model is here. And, because, for example, when I was in the CELTA and Delta and the ESL courses abroad, I felt like each lesson planning structure had a very clear structure, right? The presentation, practice, produce had very clear guidelines for each stage. Here, this seems to come as more checklists of what needs to happen. So there needs to be interaction during every lesson. And, fair enough. Each lesson does need to have interaction, but it's unclear what stage of the lesson this needs to happen at. And perhaps it doesn't need to happen at a particular stage. It just needs to happen somewhere in the lesson. So it strikes me as less of a lesson planning format than a lesson planning checklist, which I don't know, maybe is for the best. I don't know, but feels like, somebody let me know if that's a correct assessment. This is not so much a format for lesson planning as a checklist for lesson planning. Now, that being said, once I got into the individual features, it was not completely foreign to me. This is stuff which is emphasized in the British model as well. For example, building backgrounds, concepts explicitly linked to students' background experience. So, that would be the lead-in in a traditional CELTA-style lesson, right? Or practice and application, right? So this would be the practice and production stage of a PPP lesson in the British model, etc. So there was a comprehensible input. Of course, that is very familiar terminology to any language teacher. So the actual concepts itself were familiar. It's just this classification of them is what I'm getting my head around. So Yeah, I hope I got something out of this book. It's a book where I did struggle to stay focused, and especially during the sample lessons and the discussion of lessons, which makes up a fair amount of this book, I really did struggle to keep everything straight in my head as I was comparing 3 different lessons at the back of this. I wonder if there was a way this could have been done better. Perhaps once I actually get into my new job and get more exposure with this method, it will be useful to revisit these sections of the books and maybe even the sample lessons. But yeah, as somebody who's just reading this book during summer break, it all felt a little bit disconnected from what I was doing every day. Yeah. So, yeah, that's my review, I guess. Let me know what you thought about this book, or if you have any other books to recommend on this model.